The cybersecurity skills gap might be one of the best ways for companies to become more cyber secure. Often we look at technological solutions and those solutions work really well as well. But training and education of workers, of employees, remains one of the most effective tactics. For Tech Republic and ZDNet, I'm Dan Patterson, and it's a pleasure today to speak with Ray Rothrock. He is the CEO at RedSeal. Ray, you have advised some companies, in fact, some business schools, that they need to evolve. In what ways can business schools evolve to help teach even non-tech students to become more tech savvy and more cyber savvy?
Well, good morning, Dan. Thanks for having me on. So the evolution of business schools, and I went to one about 30 years ago, business schools teach basic strategy. And strategy includes competition, friend and foe, and what advantages you can have. What you're always trying to tilt the table towards you as an owner of a business, a CEO of a business. And so one of the things that needs to be part of the conversation now is about cyber. And what is cyber? Cyber, used to be sort of relegated to the corner of IT, a little tiny it was the engineering problem. Even the CIO didn't much care about it. Well, that's no longer the case, as we all are well aware from all the headlines and the events that we read about in the news and the continuing of this saga. So if you don't get ahead of it, cyber becomes a tax on your business. And that's a bad thing. And I'm talking about money tax. Just to spend money on these technological solutions that you suggested is only part of the solution. The real part of the solution is to become aware of it, train your people, and then test your people. You just have to. It's like you wouldn't hire someone to be your head of marketing if they've never done marketing. You never hire an engineer if they didn't have an engineering degree, probably. So you really shouldn't hire anyone that doesn't have basic cyber understanding, because about 95% of all the successful infiltrations and exports of data is a result of a human being making a mistake. It even happens in my company. We just had one last week, and it's just the way of the business. So if you don't get ahead of it, you'll be taxed to death. And if you get taxed to death, then you don't have cash. You don't have cash to invest in new products. Your business suffers.
So I imagine this varies business to business, and some of the basic tactics like pen testing and just keeping an eye out for those phishing tactics, I think most people can kind of register and say, okay, I know what to do. But when you're training people, especially experts in business school, how do you teach them more sophisticated and nuanced methods of cyber defense?
Well, that's a good question. I mean, cyber is it's not products per se. Products are part of it and people are part of it, but there's a strategy involved. And the strategy is having the best products, having policies, compliance information, not just regulatory things that the law says you have to do, but think about, like you said, every business is a little different. If you're completely online, then obviously you have one set of criteria. If you're a completely offline company, you have another. But you have cyber issues. And the strategy would include, like, for example, my company sells a network modeling capability. So we understand your networks at the most goriest detail, the most deepest detail. And if you, say, for example, run it every 2 weeks, you can get an update of your network so that if you're attacked, you could then be prepared to deal with it, because technology solutions are only part of the answer. You have to have people who understand it, understand what to do if you're under attack. I'm not answering your question, I apologize. But you have to, it has to be a board level. It has to be probably in the audit committee, if not a separate committee. You have to have measures. Are we gaining on it? Are we not gaining on it? Part of what I do and many other companies, we score things. We make it possible for you to know. If you're making it better. If your CIO walks in and wants $100 million to invest in cybersecurity, that's a lot of money no matter who you are. It's like, well, can you prove to me that you made it better? So part of your strategy needs to involve this kind of thinking where you have, just like anything, you invest money, you expect a return. You invest money, you expect better products. You invest money in cyber, you expect better protection. That's just part of the thinking that's got to go into it. I can imagine some great business cases that could be talked about now, but The question is, what could they have done differently, or what could they do better in the future?
I think actually a fantastic answer to the question, because different hacking tactics and different defensive mechanisms will shift as technologies shift. So how do you teach leaders to hire the right people who can manage the kind of faster shifts and trends that happen in cybersecurity? And then how do you teach those people to communicate upwards to their management so that issues of real concern or imminent danger get communicated to the right people at the right times?
That communication thing is really hard, because cyber is full of what I call gobbledygook language. But first of all, I think management has to acknowledge that there's no perfect technological solution and that people will make mistakes. Once you teach that and ingrain that in your DNA of your culture, then you're much better prepared, and you'll hire people who are prepared. You'll hire, firemen, for example. They don't, when they show up, they're not firemen to start with. They go through training processes. They learn how to put a fire out. And do we expect buildings to catch on fire? Well, not really. I mean, your home, I can see a sprinkler on the wall right back there. The building I'm in also has sprinklers, but a fire could happen, and these firemen know what to do. So they have picked people who've passed aptitude and exams that have an attitude of like, technology's not perfect, people aren't perfect, so what do I have to do? And they know how to think about that. I'm going to make an awkward reference. I was a nuclear engineer about 35 years ago. And at a nuclear power plant, we think of this concept called defense in depth, which may or may not be cool, but it's thinking, what could go wrong? If it went wrong, what would you do to mitigate it? And that's the kind of mentality that management has to have at the most senior level. If, the Equifax says, if our database is stolen, what do we do? How do we respond to that? How do we prepare for that? That just seems to me jacks are better today to be a CEO of any data-rich company. You have to be thinking, it could happen, and what would I do about it?
Ray Rothrock, he is the CEO of RedSeal. Ray, that's great advice. And I wonder if you could leave us with some advice going forward into 2018 and beyond. The cyber landscape is very rapidly. How should companies in the short term communicate the needs, their particular needs, to their team, to their staff members? And then how should they find good ways to incentivize their employees to communicate cyber needs up the chain?
Yeah. So I would set up recurring training programs. There's plenty online. They're easy to do. They test people. You should do that. Look, 2018 and beyond, the threats are changing. You've suggested it, and they are. And technology cannot keep up. So it's first about people, second about technology. Second thing you do is you got to be a little skeptical. You just got to, if you see this note from the CEO that says wire money to so-and-so, you just got to think twice before you just say, okay, blah, 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 blah. People have to have a little sensitivity to this. And unfortunately, in the email age or the text age or whatever, we think it's total authority, and it's not. So I think that's the communication. How do you communicate up? Well, look, your employees are your best source of information. So if people read and understand, they read. Some people read technical things. Some people read process. I've written several articles about questions you can ask. So if you have a channel by which that can go up to the CIO or some other executive, so that they can hear all these choices, because no one person can keep up with it all. It truly takes a village to keep it all together. And in my regular weekly staff meetings, we'll come in, someone will say something nobody heard of. The threat that we read, it's like, oh my gosh, who knew? I've got one guy in the field, that's all he does. He sits there and sniffs out all this stuff, and when something happens, he immediately publishes how to deal with it with our software. There's just people who do that, and you need to have those people on your team. You need to find them, and you need to reward them with attaboys and attagirls and whatever motivates people. It's not always money, I'll tell you. Sometimes just standing up and getting a medal, literally sticking a medal on people, makes a difference.